Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling something huge, one of the biggest transformations in all of human history. We're talking about the Neolithic expansion. And trust me, this wasn't just a small change. It was an honest-to-goodness revolution that totally reshaped our world. All right, so let's get right into the big question, the one that archaeologists have been wrestling with for like a century. How on earth did a way of life that started in this tiny corner of the world end up dominating an entire continent? Was it just a friendly exchange of ideas, or was there something a little more dramatic going on? Okay, first things first. We need to get our heads around the sheer scale of this thing. This was not some minor software update for humanity. No, this was a complete system reboot. A total revolution in the most fundamental thing, how we lived our lives.
So what are we talking about here? It's this thing archaeologists call the Neolithic package. Think of it like a new toolkit for humanity. It had agriculture, domesticating animals, building settled villages, even making pottery. I mean, this whole package completely flipped our relationship with the planet on its head. For the first time ever, we weren't just finding food, we were making it. And that shift, well, it changed absolutely everything. Now check this out. This is what's so wild. Look at the speed and the scale of this spread. We're talking about a period of just 2,000 years, which in the grand scheme of things is a blink of an eye. In that time, the area where people lived this new lifestyle just exploded. It grew by 3, maybe even 4 times as it shot out from the Near East and started covering Europe. It's like a wildfire of change.
So, for a long, long time, the story of how this happened seemed, well, pretty simple. It was almost treated like this inevitable march of progress, right? You had the old way of doing things, and then the new, better way just came along and replaced it. End of story.
And the main person behind this idea was a super famous archaeologist named V. Gordon Childe. His theory was pretty compelling. It basically went like this. Farming creates way more food, a surplus, right? And what happens when you have more food? You get a dramatic increase in population, just like the quote says. So Childe argued that these new, so-called advanced farmers just packed up and moved west, looking for more land for their growing families.
And this really sums up the whole mindset back then. It was seen as this one straight arrow moving across the map, a simple replacement story. The farmers move in, the primitive hunter-gatherers move out. A nice, neat, linear story. But, as you're about to see, the real story is so much messier and, frankly, way more interesting.
And then, everything changed. In the 1960s, a scientific bombshell dropped that just blew that simple story to pieces. That bombshell was radiocarbon dating. For the very first time, we could put an actual, absolute clock on the past. This was a total game changer.
See, before radiocarbon dating, archaeologists had to play detective by, comparing stuff. They'd look at pottery styles, for instance. They found this really sophisticated pottery from a place called the Vinci culture in the Balkans. And it looked a lot like pottery from famous sites like Troy over in Anatolia. So the logical conclusion seemed obvious, right? Vinci must be a later colony, started by people from the more advanced East. But then they ran the radiocarbon dates, and wow, the timeline got flipped completely upside down. The results were absolutely shocking. The Vinci culture wasn't younger, it was way, way older than its supposed origin point in Troy. This proved that these European cultures weren't just knockoffs. They were ancient, they were complex, and they were independent. So you see the problem, right? This scientific breakthrough didn't solve the puzzle. It created an even bigger one. The old linear story was dead. It just collapsed. So if it wasn't a simple march of farmers, then what on earth really happened? A new, much more complex explanation was desperately needed.
Okay, so fast forward a few decades, and we get the next scientific revolution, ancient DNA. This is where things get really personal. Because now for the first time, scientists could literally read the story written in the bones of the actual people who lived through this incredible transformation.
And again, the results were just stunning. Scientists took DNA from the remains of Europe's first farmers and compared it to the DNA of the hunter-gatherers who were already living there. And what did they find? They were 2 totally different groups of people. Genetically distinct populations. Not the same folks at all.
And it wasn't just a one-off finding. Studies from places like Barchin and Anatolia and the very first farming villages in Greece all confirm the same thing. Europe's first farmers were overwhelmingly migrants. Their genetic ancestry pointed straight back to the Anatolian and Aegean regions. So, in a way, Gordon Childe was right about the migration part. But it turns out that was only one piece of a much, much bigger puzzle. But this, of course, just leads to another question, doesn't it? Okay, so they were migrants from the Near East. But was the Near East just one big, monolithic group of people? Did they all come from the same place? And you guessed it, DNA had the answer. And the answer was a clear no. The Near East wasn't one single group. It was a total mosaic of different peoples. For example, the farmers from the Zagros Mountains, that's in modern-day Iran, they were genetically a completely different group from the Anatolian farmers who became the ancestors of most of Europe's first farmers. So, let's step back for a second. We've got the archaeology, we've got the radiocarbon dates that blew up the timeline, and now we've got the genetics. And when you put all of those clues together, what you get is a new human story. It's a much richer, much messier, and frankly, a way more fascinating picture of our past. So forget the idea of a single event. This was a slow burn process unfolding over thousands of years. Yeah, it kicked off with waves of migration from Anatolia, but for centuries, these incoming farmers and the local hunter-gatherers lived side by side, sometimes as neighbors, sometimes ignoring each other. And only very, very slowly did they start to mix, to exchange genes, and to share ideas. And then, just to make it even more complex, later migrations from other places, like the steppe, added whole new layers to the story. What this all means is that there wasn't one way farming spread. It happened in all sorts of different ways, all at the same time. You had these bold pioneers kind of leapfrogging along the coasts, skipping huge territories to find the best spots. At the same time, you had the slow, creeping expansion inland, almost generation by generation. In some places, hunter-gatherers saw what was happening and decided to adopt the new lifestyle themselves. In other places, maybe they just traded, or maybe they just kept their distance. There was no single rulebook. So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. That simple, straight arrow of progress we talked about, it's gone. It's been totally replaced by this messy, multi-layered, complex mosaic of human interaction. It's a story about migration, for sure, but it's also a story about coexistence, about cultural exchange, and about people adapting to new neighbors and new ideas. And that leaves us with a pretty powerful final thought, doesn't it? This whole new story of our deep past, a story built on a century of incredible scientific discovery, shows us that the very foundations of our world were built on constant movement, on migration, on the mixing of different peoples and different ideas. So the question is, what does that say about how we think about identity and culture and migration in our own world today?